you start feeling the fact that gravity is getting tired and it switches off. And so it is possible that we shouldn't use quite the same laws of Einstein's theory of relativity on those large distances. A theory of massive gravity, where it would be just like Einstein's theory of relativity in principle, but the particle would be a massive particle.
Claudia de Rham, welcome to How the Light Gets In. So you're a theoretical physicist, as well as a qualified pilot, deep sea diver, and I believe that you've trained as an astronaut as well. So you've said that all of this is part of your pursuit of gravity. So I just wondered, what is it about gravity that makes you want to pursue it in these very miscellaneous ways?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I've been asking myself that question more and more in trying to articulate it for the public. I think there's different aspects really, and they're all intertwined to one another. One of it is the playfulness of gravity, which I think we all have in ourselves from a very early age, and maybe some of us lose it as we grow older, and somehow I never lost it. But it's this ability of challenging a little bit. There's this notion that gravity is always there. There's some level of seriousness in which we can't escape from it, and yet we like to play with it. And so in playing with gravity and trying to challenge it a little bit, this is us as human interrogating nature, interrogating how things are working all around us, which is, I do believe, part of human nature. So that fascination from gravity, I think, is there for all of us from an early age. For me, it was also this idea that we are all connected through gravity. And as a kid, I don't think I articulated quite like this, but there is something so beautiful, so fundamental about gravity that we in fact can never escape it. And it's not that we can't escape it because we can't go in outer space and escape the clutch of gravity. It's more fundamental than that. We all interact with gravity, whether we want it or not. You interact with gravity. In fact, we too interact with one another through gravity. And we interact with everything, everyone, everywhere in the universe through gravity. We can never really shield ourselves from gravity. You can think of a Faraday cage for electromagnetism, where you can shield yourself from electromagnetic waves, but that's not the case for gravity. Everyone is connected through gravity. And so for me, this universality of gravity was, I think, part of belonging into something deeper than all of us, and that's part of the fascination in trying to understand it more deeply, trying to understanding the laws of nature and how to unify them more deeply.
So I suppose as a physicist, you're interested in the most fundamental things, the most universal things.
That's right.
And for you, more than space and time, gravity is that thing.
Exactly, exactly. I'm a cosmologist, and so I use the laws of gravity intertwined with the other fundamental laws of nature to understand cosmology, and also the evolution of the universe, the fate of the universe, what the universe is made out of. But also I like to think of cosmology as a way to probe fundamental science, the fundamental laws of nature. And people often ask me, why are you interested in cosmology per se when we can interrogate nature all around us? And in fact, cosmology and gravity is really extracting all of the complications out to get into the core of the problem. And so everything else for me is far too complicated. If you really want to go to the core of what is the most fundamental element of nature, then it is gravity. It is space and time together.
Yeah, there's something quite beautiful about the idea that cosmology is about the biggest thing you can think of.
That's right.
But also the tiniest.
That's right, that's right. It's incredible how through the biggest thing we can think of, you can in fact interrogate the fundamental elements of nature, the fundamental forces of nature.
So I want to talk about general relativity. Obviously works amazingly well as a theory of gravity, but you've suggested changes to it. Part of your motivation for this is the cosmological constant problem. So can you just tell us what that problem is to begin with?
Yes, absolutely. So the cosmological constant problem, you can think of it as well as the vacuum energy problem. It's in fact a challenge, a question which has been there for more than a century. Already from 1907, we know that in nothingness, in what we call the vacuum, in nothing other, there should be some bubbling in and out of existence, at least virtual particles, some elements there which should carry energy. And in and of itself, that element of energy shouldn't matter too much if it wasn't for gravity. As I said before, gravity is really so profound in that it connects everything, everyone. And so if there is some nothingness and if there is some energy associated with this nothingness, then it should have an effect on gravity. And this has been an understanding since the development of Einstein's theory of general relativity, and already since the 1920s and then throughout the past century, people understood that this energy carried by the quantum vacuum, the vacuum carrying some quantum fluctuations of particles out there, should have an effect through gravity on the evolution of the universe. Now, Zaldovich in 1968 was the first one to put that more in a cosmological setting, and understanding that this quantum vacuum energy should be playing the role of a cosmological constant, which was already introduced by Einstein. That's his greatest blunder. Then he took it out because he didn't think at the time that the universe was evolving and that this evolution was in fact accelerating. But nowadays we know that the universe is not this static thing. It has a life of its own. It's evolving, it's expanding, and it's been observed since 1998 that this expansion of the universe is in fact accelerating. And so in fact, when you think of this, it's actually two of the fundamental pillars of modern physics, general relativity on one side and quantum field theory on the other side, and the prediction that there should be some quantum vacuum energy that carries energy. If you put both of them together, they lead to the prediction that this should effectively, cosmologically, behave like a cosmological constant, leading to the accelerated expansion of the universe. So this is really a beautiful framework where, as we said before, you can use cosmology to test the pillars of modern physics: quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, the quantum framework on one hand, and general relativity, gravity, the laws of gravity on the other hand. So in principle, the prediction that the universe expansion should be accelerating should be seen as a huge success. Why are we calling it the cosmological constant problem?
Yes, I was wondering, because you said the universe is expanding and it's accelerating, and that's what's predicted.
In fact, there shouldn't be any problem in our qualitative observations. The universe is in fact accelerated, and it's expanding at an accelerated rate. The only problem, if it were, is at this rate of acceleration, if we consider the laws of quantum mechanics, we would have expected it to be way too large, far too fast as compared to what is variable. Not even as compared to observations, but as compared to what would be viable for us to be in this room right now. Already since 1927, from Nernst and from it was understood that if we just consider the energy being present in the electron itself, we would have expected it to lead to an accelerated expansion of the universe, which would mean that we wouldn't even be able to see the moon, which clearly that's not the case.
And so I suppose dark energy has been one way that people have tried to solve this problem.
Okay, so let me maybe rephrase this a little bit. So when it's been understood for more than a century now that we should have expected this quantum vacuum energy to be there, to act like a cosmological constant, and to lead to an accelerated expansion of the universe. Only it should have been way too fast. And so at the time, already close to a century ago, when this was first realized, people realized that it was way too fast. And so to make sense of reality all around us, the only way to make progress was to say that for a reason or another, we didn't quite understand this quantum vacuum energy or how it behaved like a cosmological constant. So maybe for asymmetry or another reason or another that we don't fully have control of, let's just ignore it. Let's just park it for a second. Let's just say that in fact it has no effect at all, because that's what people thought at the time. Now, in the meantime, it's been observed that the universe is accelerating, and we should see this as a huge success, in fact, almost as a prediction of the interface between quantum field theory and gravity. But because it's way too fast, and because for half a century people had set down to zero or parked aside this cosmological constant or this quantum vacuum energy, then instead, when it was observed that the universe was in fact accelerating, what some members of the community have done is instead come up with a new potential explanation for the accelerated expansion of the universe called dark energy. Because dark energy doesn't resolve the original cosmological constant problem in the first place, and in fact introduces other problems of its own. So it doesn't really address anything. It's just a placeholder for now in saying this accelerated expansion of the universe, it can be driven by either a cosmological constant, which could be quantum vacuum energy, or something else. Is to open up our realm of possibilities in why the universe is accelerating. Now you were asking me where I fit into all of this picture, and it is really very much in going back to basis and saying that in fact we had a very natural explanation for what dark energy is, if that's what you want to call it, or what the source of the late time acceleration of the universe is, and this is the quantum vacuum energy, which behaves like a cosmological constant, so much so that we can just call it a cosmological constant. Now, the only reason we didn't like this, we as human, we didn't like it to start with, was because it seemed to be way too large. And so some possibility, or at least we should enable us to contemplate the possibility that this quantum vacuum energy is indeed very large. We have a very large cosmological constant, but that may in fact lead to a small accelerated expansion of the universe, because the way we make the translation between the components of the universe and its response to that is through Einstein's theory of general relativity. But we have only tested Einstein's theory of general relativity up to some distance scales. We understand it, in fact, very well in this room, in the solar system, even in scales of sizes of galaxies and clusters of galaxies. But beyond that, we don't know. We're actually using Einstein's theory of general relativity to describe the behavior of the universe, but maybe that's not the right description. And in fact, it's not just what happens on large distance scales, but it's what happens on large time space. So it's not only on large regions of the universe, it's throughout the whole history of the universe. Maybe we are reaching a stage in a universe age. The universe is getting old enough that we're no longer allowed to use Einstein's theory of general relativity to describe its late time behavior. And so in tweaking ever so slightly general relativity to enable it to have a slightly different behavior on long time scales, on large distances, this would enable us to reconciliate this quantum vacuum energy with, in fact, a late time acceleration of the universe, but not too fast, just right.
And the way to do this is to give gravity mass, right?
That's right, that's right. That seems so counterintuitive when we use this terminology, because we think of mass is what gives gravity. That's what people think typically. So when we say we give gravity a mass, or we're thinking of a massive gravity, we're not thinking of it being huge. No, it's not massive in gravity, is being very large. Rather, it's in saying that the fundamental carrier of this force, there's a particle, in fact, this is there already in Einstein's theory of general relativity, which carries the force, which carries gravity. So if you drop an apple it will fall towards the center of the Earth. This communication of the gravitational force between the apple and the Earth fundamentally is being carried by a messenger, and a messenger is the graviton, is a particle. Now, in Einstein's theory of general relativity, this messenger is there, and the particle associated with it, the graviton, is a massless particle, which in fact, in practice, means that it has an infinite reach. It has an infinite range, so it never switches off. And this is, I would say, part of the seriousness of Einstein's theory of general relativity, in that it never stops. It carries on forever till the end of time. But now you can think of whether it's possible that at some point this particle will get tired and it will start switching off. And that will mean that if you start contemplating effect or the communication of gravity between two things which are very, very far away in space or in time, then you start feeling the fact that gravity is getting tired and it switches off. And so it is possible that we shouldn't use quite the same laws of Einstein's theory of general relativity on those large distances.
So if we give it mass, then we get this picture.
Mass, that's right. If we give it mass, gravity gets tired and switches off. And so effectively, if you think of changing the laws of gravity on large distances, that always corresponds in one way or another to the particle carrier of gravity switching its behavior and effectively being massive, as being a massive particle.
Right, and this helps solve the problem, the cosmological constant problem.
That's right. So it helps solving the cosmological constant problem because it says that all of this quantum vacuum energy, not all of it leads to an accelerated expansion of the universe. A smaller fraction of it, because if you go to very large distances or very long time scales, then gravity becomes a bit more lazy, if it were, and that's a good thing sometimes. We should just stop. and because it's not being carried by gravity anymore, it has no longer such a big effect on the evolution of the universe. And so it helps us reconcile this large quantum vacuum energy, this cosmological constant, with our observation that the universe is indeed accelerating, but by a small amount, not a large amount.
And this theory of massive gravity is not totally new, right? It's been around for a long time, but ignored because of the problem of ghosts. Can you tell us what that problem is?
Ghosts, that's right, and that's a scientific terminology. In fact, that's exactly right. So it's a very, very natural possibility. You can trace it back down to the 1929 from Hertz and Pauli, but you can even go back to Newton. Newton is known for his Newton law of universal gravitation, but he was very creative and innovative, and he also contemplated the possibility of gravity switching off at some point, having a finite reach. And that's the same idea. At the time, he wasn't thinking of gravity being mediated by a particle, so he wasn't quite formulating it in those sense. But what I'm trying to say is that this idea that gravity could switch off is a very natural one. It's the first one people would think of. And so already in the 16th, 17th century, people started thinking about that idea, and that never stopped really. It never stopped. People started continuing looking at it. Laplace looked at it. And then when it came to formulating the theory of gravity, not through Newtonian mechanics, but through Einstein's theory of general relativity, we understood that it corresponds to the curvature of space-time. And then since a century now, we're celebrating the 100 years of quantum mechanics, and then very quickly after came quantum field theory. People understood very early on that gravity was mediated by a quantum particle, the graviton. And so Hertz and Pauli, already 100 years ago, understood that we could think of the idea of having that particle be massive. And so they already contemplated the possibility of having a theory of massive gravity, where it would be just like Einstein's theory of general relativity in principle, but the particle would be a massive particle. And that brings up a lot of other effects which changes ever so slightly our theory of gravity. One way to think about it is, for instance, the gravitational waves that we have observed. They are gravitational waves that distort the structure of space when they evolve through space and time in a particular direction with a particular pattern. But now if the gravitational waves could be massive in the sense that they could have a mass, those gravitational waves wouldn't need to propagate quite at the speed of light anymore. Just like you and me, we don't go every day at the speed of light. In fact, we always go slower than the speed of light. But we are quite massive in the sense that we have quite a large mass, also in the sense that we're very important, but we are there, and so we can be at rest. We don't need to go very close to the speed of light. Now for gravity, we don't want the mass of gravity to be very large, we want it to be extremely small. So those gravitational waves would travel almost at the speed of light, so much so that in current observation it would be indistinguishable from the speed of light. But it could be still that gravitational waves would be able to fluctuate a little bit along the line of propagation, because they could go ever so slightly and ever more slowly. So that gives us different ways in which gravitational waves operate, and not only do they distort the spatial direction, they can also start distorting the temporal direction. And that creates some notion of ghost. If you enable you to be able to slightly switch on and off the way you fluctuate in time, then you can think of all sorts of pathologies out there which would completely mix up with the way we organize the structure of reality for us. We don't want to be able to go back and forth in time. That's not a possibility. And that's also typically associated with having negative energy. And so it was understood already since a century ago that once you start looking at those directions, in fact, all sorts of different things could come up there. In particular, there could be a ghost that corresponds to fluctuations along the temporal direction of gravitational waves, which should never happen. And so once they started understanding that this was a possibility, they just decided that this was too pathological, too scary to think about. And so for 80 years, people thought that we should banish the idea of gravity being massive, of massive gravity, because of this ghost problem.
And it's not that you are not scared of ghosts, you are, but that you have shown that we actually can get rid of the ghosts.
Exactly. That's
really
exactly what happened. So in fact, motivated by the discovery of the accelerated expansion of the universe, we went back to understanding whether we could use massive gravity to, in fact, resolve this problem through the behavior of gravity. And so we were very motivated in trying to understand how this could work. And when my collaborators and I started looking into that, we understood very well that there was this problem of ghosts that were not to be messed about. I knew that, and I was scared of that, very much so. So we weren't trying to resolve that huge problem in itself, but rather we were trying to rely on other features, including higher dimensions, to effectively go to the same conclusion. And what we realized in doing so was that we could bypass the presence of a ghost in these models relying on extra dimensions. And if it was possible to bypass them by going into extra dimensions, we could in fact go back to the models that people had considered at the time, and there was a way to bypass that problem there. There's a way to lock the ghost out of the room in a way that it can't enable us to mix up with time. And so we can have a theory where the graviton has a mass, a theory of massive gravity, without this ghost problem.
So we're at How the Light Gets In, a philosophy festival, a science festival. I wondered if I could ask a very philosophical question. So how should we think of gravitons? Should we think of them as real things out there, or just as like theoretical posits? How do you think about them? Do they exist?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say I like them. I would say they're my friends. So I really very much like them to think that they exist. Those type of questions go into within the realm of the foundations of quantum mechanics. What is a particle? Does it exist? No, it doesn't quite exist. It's more within the realm of probability and some localization of energy. Now for the graviton, that realm goes even further, because within the instruments and the experiments that we have at our disposal right now, we can't look at the effect of one graviton, of one particle. We can do that for an electron, we can do that for a photon, we can do that for all of the other particles that we know. But for the graviton, it's not even that we don't have the technology to observe and detect them, is that we know that the effect of a single graviton to detect it would be so small that it would go below the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So it's even impossible to look at the effect of a single graviton from a current type of experiments. However, it doesn't mean that it's not real. That our inability of measuring it and looking at its effect doesn't mean that it doesn't have an element of reality. And in fact, when we are thinking about gravity in the quantum framework, like we do for cosmology, for instance, when we look at the sky, we look at temperature, we see temperature fluctuations, which are imprint of quantum fluctuations from the very beginning of the universe. And we do think on a daily basis about the quantum fluctuations of gravity at the very beginning of the universe, and those should be imprinted in the sky. And we're having, in fact, experiments and observations out there that are looking for these imprints of quantum fluctuations of gravity in the sky. So detecting them would really put reality in the idea that gravity is quantum and that there is such a thing as quantum gravity and a particle of quantum gravity, which is the graviton.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Claudia de Rham.